Funding for this program was provided in part by the John Ben Snow Memorial Trust and by Meridian Gold.
In 1970, a friend and I started something called the Salt Flat News. It was a tabloid modeled after the New York Daily News. We were just coming out of the 60s. There were a lot of tabloids. They were all about social turmoil and revolution. And we thought, well, just as an antidote to that, we'd go out to the Salt Flats. We thought, where's a place where nothing could possibly happen? And we called it the Salt Flat News, and ostensibly that was where we were based. But as a result of that, I realized there's a lot of stuff even happens on the Salt Flats. Wherever you are, something's happening.
Great Basin was the last physiographic province of the United States to be defined, to be discovered. It's a sink in both a physical sense and an imaginative sense, in that water flows in and doesn't flow out. Imagination kind of flows in and doesn't flow out.
Well, this place is sort of a magnet for people who don't fit in anywhere else. There's a saying that people who don't fit in anywhere else go to Nevada, and people who don't fit in Nevada go to Battle Mountain, but that's kind of unkind.
If I was gonna make any kind of generalization about a Western state of mind, I would just say, let's make it a broad-based generalization. Say you gotta be, a sun lover and a wide open spaces kind of person. Because, that is the West. I mean, Nevada is sure not like Massachusetts.
So it's a state that is a state of mind, it's often said, as well as a state of physical geography that's very specific. Has more mountain ranges per square mile than anywhere else in the world except for Afghanistan. 340 or plus separate mountain ranges in the Great Basin. And it's an extraordinary territory that almost defies our ability to scale ourselves within it and to understand it.
I think that the fact that this is public land, this is federally owned land, that all citizens have a right to be here. You can camp anywhere you want, and you don't have to drop some money in a slot. You're not overly regulated.
Another thing that makes for a nice Western state of mind, if you're not hung up on trees, really helps. You get into California and there's just too many damn trees. You can't see anything. People who love trees and who need trees and who have to have trees, they're not going to be so Western. But if you can handle the occasional pocket of trees or whatever, you're going to be, I don't know about Western, you're going to be a desert person. You're certainly going to be a Great Basin person.
I think it was a magnet for a certain type of person, and I found although you don't meet a lot of people out here, if you do meet someone, that's quite an unusual person who has quite an unusual story. I remember sitting there one day reading about Mark Twain, his book Roughing It. I started wishing I could be on that stagecoach going west toward Virginia City on this road. And bit by bit, I started moving westward toward Nevada, across this stretch, and eventually worked my way all the way across Nevada. The longer you're on this part of this side of the world out here in the Great Basin, the more you like it. Most of the people in my book I did meet in the 70s. It was a magical time for me. My bus was fairly new and more reliable. And you had a strange mix, a little boost from the hippie movement, mingled with the the regular hobos and drifters who lived out here, and just being young and out here and open to experience. I met people that seem to be rarer and rarer today. I'm not primarily a landscape photographer because if you come out here, you'll see these mountains haven't seemed to change much. I mean, I can't see the change. They are changing, but at such a slow pace that it won't register with me. But a person, a human being, is changing constantly. And in just a snap of a second, you can save that moment. And that's the moment, I'm looking for the moment when a person is not self-conscious, this just rapport, maybe just a look that anyone looking at that picture would recognize the humanity, that shared humanity that we all have as human beings. Photography is the art of the instant moment. Writing's different. Writing's more of a subjective, it's something you can do at home at your desk. And it draws more on your personal view of things, where photography it's subjective to a degree, but it depends. My book is an attempt to, the words "do what I do" photographically is just kind of be invisible and a fly on the wall and let people talk. And you know, I use the tape recorder a lot. That's kind of a version of a camera. It's capturing reality in a box and holding on to that moment.
We wrote the ordinance, so I had to do away with 60 cars. Boy, that was a heartbreaker. Some of them still had a lot of good parts on them.
Yeah, I think it's good to travel alone because you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to bad stuff, but also good stuff. But you're not insulated. And as long as you're not, if a tour bus were to pull up to some old codger's cabin and everyone jumped out with cameras clicking, that would be pretty off-putting. I don't think they'd get much out of him. But if just a lone guy in an unthreatening vehicle like I have, people are quite open, and people have been really good to me. But I think it's important to just be vulnerable to the experience when you're out here. Not run away from it, not hide from it. I wanted to document this.
Last of the Volkswagen.
Well, this is where Volkswagens come to die.
That's about the last of the junkyard.
They're like elephants.
One of the nicknames for the Great Basin is the Big Empty. And it's a place that people really have to work hard to understand and then become comfortable in over time. So I think there are different kinds of people who come into this space. Some people just transit, they don't want to stop. Some people are here by accident because their car breaks down, which is, some people have said, is how half of Nevada got settled anyway. Some people are sent here to work, and they either stay or go, depending on how they react to the land. But you find these sort of clusters of people who end up spending time in Nevada and how they relate to the desert. The clusters can include things such as the people who simply like to go out for the day and recreate in it, look around, don't get too far from their car, don't get too far outside their comfort zone, and they relate to the desert that way. Other people will go out and say, let's leave the car behind, let's park, let's walk out for a day or two, let's camp and stay here and spend some time here. Burning Man is kind of the largest example of that in the world. You know, if you've got 50,000 people out there, it's one of the largest cities in the state for a week. They all go out, they camp together, and then they pick up and go home. Another example is someone who might come to the Great Basin and say, I really want to live out there. I really want to be out in the landscape. I don't want to live in one of the big cities. I don't want to live in a town even. I want to be out by myself. And then, of course, there are the true hermits, the true desert hermits, who want absolutely nothing to do with anyone else, in as much as that's possible. No satellite phone, no satellite TV, no cell phone, nothing, no landlines. They just want to be out by themselves. Often these are people who sort of scavenge from the land. They find materials around them, either left by other people or just in the land itself, put together their home, their domicile, and they're just as happy as they can be, as happy as they can possibly make themselves in a situation as large as the Great Basin.
Of all the people I met, I guess Floyd was the most fascinating. He was a mystery man who rides into town like Clint Eastwood, except he's not Clint Eastwood. My first impression of the man remains a vivid one. Out of an acrid cloud of burning tire smoke he had emerged, tall and lean, the butts of twin revolvers showing from a double shoulder holster. His thinning hair and pencil mustache were the color of the Kiwi brand shoe polish he applied weekly. Into one corner of his toothless mouth was jammed a stubby K. Woody pipe. At his side was a black and white border collie he called Tina, deputy dog. He's a hobo, or he's a bum, or a tramp, but he's not a tramp. There's more to him than that. And he literally came to town with just a Bible and a bedroll. And he settled down in the city dump. And using stuff he found there, he built a house and had a nice kitchen. Coffee was always on. And then he sort of appointed himself constable of the town dump, so he would go roust the hobos out of the shrubbery and confiscate their wine. So he's always had a nice supply of confiscated wine. If you were in his house, you could have a nice drink. And he had an endless repertoire of stories.
Well, yesterday, I got up and I laid in on his house. And partner, I'm telling you, I went all the long day. I cleaned this son of a bitch up. I cleaned up my shop. I cleaned my office up. Cleaned the bedroom. I cleaned this and I cleaned the restroom. Then I went in and I cleaned up the kitchen. I put my silverware stuff away. I cleaned out my silverware drawers. I give him a big bunch of silverware and stuff just to get rid of it. Got more and more than need.
Where'd you get all that?
Huh?
Where'd you get all your silverware?
Right here. Right about that hill. Come state line, most of it.
I was thinking you never got married, so you wouldn't get any for wedding presents.
We were chatting in Floyd's cabin, a ramshackle affair he'd constructed entirely from salvaged materials. All of his household furnishings had come off the dump as well, including his wood stove and easy chair, his bed, his kitchen table and chairs, his pots and pans, his knives and forks. His only possessions that hadn't previously been possessed by someone else were his cowboy hat and his pearl buttoned shirt, items he insisted had been specially tailored to fit by Stockman's Western Wear in Denver. Floyd Eaton was a man of many, many stories, very colorful history, imagined or real. He seemed to have this ongoing relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. No matter where he went, he kept running into her, whether a cafe in Florida or the rodeo grounds in Dallas or a carnival site in Marfa, Texas. He told me a great story about giving Elizabeth Taylor a ride on his Ferris wheel. Floyd worked as a carny, obviously, for a while. And while he was in Marfa, it just happened they were filming the movie Giant, and Floyd won a part in the movie as Jane Withers' stunt woman, for which he was paid $100. It was a great story. The man was very inventive. He'd be a wonderful writer if only he had a contract with television. My favorite story, he told me that he was an international ranger. Then there was the badge. Like its owner, it showed signs of hard use. Engraved on the front was an eagle perched upon a sunburst, and below the sunburst was an inscription, F.D. Eaton, International Ranger. And he'd spent his life as a lawman in the Southwest and Mexico, chasing international criminals around, but he wanted to retire, so that's why he ended up in the Wendover City dump, because he didn't want people in Washington bugging him anymore, or sending him on any more dangerous cases. He used to have a patrol car. Any impounded car would end up in the dump in Floyd's keeping. So it was a confiscated automobile. And Floyd said that all he had to do was fill out what he called the resurrection papers. And he could use this vehicle as an ersatz cruiser. And he and Deputy Dog would patrol the vicinity looking for any miscreants that they could lock up or shoot or whatever they had to do to maintain the peace and quiet of the Wendover City dump. Everywhere Floyd went, he was able to reinvent himself as necessary, make whatever adjustments were necessary. Even his dog was malleable. His dog could go from being a police dog to a hound dog to a lap dog, depending on what was necessary to survive. I think Floyd had my admiration because he was the ultimate survivor. He survived in situations that you and I would break us for sure. And he'd been through very hard times in the 30s as a hobo riding the freights, but none of that had dampened his spirit or his endless enthusiasm for life and romance. Well, Floyd's empire in the Wendover dump lasted until they turned it into a sanitary landfill, and unfortunately he had to move on reluctantly. So he started hitchhiking south, and he stayed in Baker for a while up in the mountains, and eventually ended up in Arkansas, where he was thinking of pursuing a career as a country singer. Last I saw him, I don't know how that went, but I'm sure it went well, because there's certain people that just no harm ever befalls them.
You still get people driving across I-80 and say, my God, that was the flattest place I've ever seen.
Because you're going too fast and you're inside an air-conditioned car and hermetically sealed inside a vehicle. And most people, their thoughts are occupied with when are we going to get to another town? Or what if I run out of gas out here? What'll happen to me? I'll be attacked by savages. It'll become deliverance. My vacation will become deliverance.
This is the Great Basin has, as I said, more mountain ranges than anywhere else on the face of the planet except for Afghanistan. So what do you mean it's flat? It's that mental expectation of what a wasteland is, which is this simply neutral gray place that you just are not going to see anything that you want to pay attention to. When the first settlers were coming through the Great Basin and going down what's called the 40-mile desert that now ends in the town of Fallon, they went across that part of the desert, which was daunting, something they wanted to cross as quickly as they could because there wasn't much water there. It was alkali flats. It's just really kind of a desperate place. When they were doing that, they were keeping a journal of what they were seeing, or more properly, of what they weren't seeing. And they would say, nothing grows here. And actually that's not true. There are all these different kinds of arid plants that are well adapted to the circumstance, but we're not well adapted to the plants. So they're invisible to us.
Imagine crossing here at the pace of a horse walking, crossing one of these valleys. It'd be quite a leisurely experience. But I think we're all moving too fast for our own good. I wish we could slow down, but nothing ever seems to slow down.
Why people come to like the Big Empty is they realize they have a chance to establish a unique relationship between themselves and the land. And what I mean is developing a mental relationship, which can lead to other kinds of things that people label spiritual. So you really develop some kind of relationship.
I was about halfway between Lovelock and Winnemucca at a dot on a road map called Imlay when I spied something most unusual. Standing 3 stories tall, ornately decorated, it somewhat resembled a tiered wedding cake. Drawing closer, I saw that it was a building with walls that were a conglomeration of concrete and rocks, wine bottles, beer cans, railroad ties, antlers, pipe, angle iron, automobile wheels, chicken wire, and hubcaps. Along the eaves ran a fanciful bas-relief frieze. Atop the roof stood a statuary garden, entwined in a tangle of colorful hoops and arches. This is one of my favorite places. This is Thunder Mountain, Nevada. It's an artifact of the 70s, which, you know, if you discount the sartorial excesses of the day, it was an exciting time. It was for me. I was young and, like a lot of people traveling this road looking for something interesting, and this was one of the places that caught my eye. When I first pulled in here, it was a regular commune, and I was steered toward the architect, Frank Van Zandt, who had renamed himself Chief Rolling Mountain Thunder.
When he retired from law enforcement, he came out here in an old 1941 Ford truck, and he broke down right out here on the road someplace.
Chief Thunder's account of how the Thunder Mountain Museum came to be squared nicely with my theory that vehicular breakdown is the motivating force behind all northern Nevada settlements. The twist was that Thunder's car ran well enough in the vicinity of Imlay. It might even take him as far as Reno, that is, provided he was only going into town to pick up groceries or another load of cement. But just try making a break for California and the wheels would fall off. The Great Spirit works in mysterious ways.
And he took that as some kind of a divine sign that maybe he should be here, because every time he tried to start up his vehicle and leave, it'd break down.
Shortly after that, the owner of the property mysteriously appeared and made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
And the guy made my dad a deal, like $5 down, $10 a month or something, some ridiculous price. And so he started building, 1967.
He had a little teardrop travel trailer, which he started rocking in, so to speak, with cement and rocks and bottles and whatever he could find that he would stick together, and started building a rock house, which over the years became a 3-story monument to the Great Spirit. He didn't cultivate, he didn't irrigate, He hadn't tried to electrify the darkness. He hadn't felt compelled to erect a structure evocative of some exotic land. Just as the pioneers had built sod houses on the prairie and log cabins in the woods, Thunder had built his dwelling using materials indigenous to the American roadside. Moreover, he put it all together without benefit of a blueprint, relying instead for guidance from the Great Spirit.
He felt like he was just going with what the Great Spirit told him. If the Great Spirit told him to stay up all night and paint everything, he would do it. If it told him to tear this place down, he would have done that. But he felt like he couldn't leave here. When he wanted to build this, he said, what have I got? I've got rocks, I've got other people's trash, and I don't have any money except I can buy cement. I can get free sand and gravel. So that's what he did. When you think about how much work went into building this place, he did the technical stuff, maybe laying the stones, but he got a lot of free help from old hippies that would help him with the rocks and mixing the concrete and that type of thing.
And at one time he had a lot of hippie artisans living there, candle makers and macrame factory.
He invited them to, if they wanted to stay. His rule was, he says, okay, if you're going to stay, I'll feed you, but you have to work. So he got a lot of free labor. It was a spiritual journey for me, the end of a spiritual journey that I didn't even know I was taking. I was driving my Jeep, my dependable Jeep. This Jeep had a power personality. It knew more than I did, and it died right here at Imlay. And there was a bunch of kind of hippie-like people building the monument, and it was just one level at that time. We sat around and sang songs and ate dinner till long after dark. So I got up about dawn the next morning and walked back over, and the whole place had changed. Everything had been repainted, new signs. I thought, what is this? How could this happen? And Thunder had been up all night long. He'd had a vision or something, and he was working all night long. I realized I had to change my whole life around. So eventually I lived out here. It's actually been my home ever since then.
The only qualifications we've ever had is that they aspire to the pure and radiant heart. That doesn't mean they have to be pure and radiant, there's no such thing. Only that they would like to be a little more pure and have a little more radiant heart than they have, you know, and be willing to work for it.
He was working 16, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I asked him, I said, why are you spending your retirement like this? You're out here working harder than you ever worked in your life. And he said, I'm having more fun than I ever had in my whole life. He says, this is fun to me. He says, not work. I counted at one time, I went around the monument, and I counted 210 different faces. And the interesting thing is when he came out here, he was in his early 50s. He'd never done any artwork before. So he just started doing these faces and these statues freehand with concrete. And that amazes a lot of artists because they don't know how he did it.
As if he had all the time in the world, Chief Thunder showed me around the compound. 5 acres littered with boards and bed springs, spools of baling wire, odd pieces of pipe, rebar, rusted out pickup trucks, and cannibalized cars, water heaters, railroad ties, cast iron boilers, a vintage Coca-Cola machine, a cow skull, a typewriter, tattered sofas of Mediterranean design. Amid the clutter, I spotted a doll and a tricycle, playthings belonging to Chief Thunder's son, Thunder Mountain Thunder, and his young daughter, Obsidian Lightning Thunder.
This is the tetherball that we used to play with when we were kids. Of course, I remember it being a lot higher because I was so short. Now it's like real short. It's my home. It'll always be my home. I love coming home to see it. Actually, as a kid, it was normal to me. It was just fun and exciting. All kinds of things to do. My brothers and sisters and I used to race up and down the stairs. We played tetherball in here, especially during the winter when it was cold. Always had lots of lights. The birds in the bottles are really pretty.
Birds in bottles?
Yes. They build nests in the bottles, and it was really, you can hear them singing. Very pretty.
You told me about the pack rats. Did you have pack rats here?
Yes, we did. Up top especially. It was too cold and dark for them down below, but they were our pets.
They were your pets?
Yes. Pack rats were friends.
Did you have any impression that your life was a little different from the average kid?
No, not until I got older. Yeah, once in a while I'd go into Winnemucca with my mom or go to Emily to the store, but it wasn't often. We mainly stayed home. Well, this was my bedroom. The stairs are coming up, and come up the stairs and come around the little wall, and my bed was over here. And sometimes I would get up in the middle of the night and we had to put the wall up, because if not, I would walk forward, and if I hadn't closed the door, I would fall down the stairs.
You told me a story about your rite of passage where your father sent you off into the woods here with just a rifle and some bullets. And
Yep, I was 13, getting ready to turn 14, and he told me it was my turn to turn into a woman, and I went up in the mountains and lived by myself for almost a year. Didn't see anybody.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty interesting. Kind of scary, especially during the winter when it was cold.
How did you spend all that time?
Mainly hiking around the hills and keeping myself busy, cutting firewood when it was really cold, hunting. Had my dog with me.
A dog?
Yes, always had a dog. I was 16 when I walked into a public school. Scariest thing of my life. So many people, I wasn't used to it. Never seen that many people.
Were you bullied?
Yes, I thought they were very mean and uncaring. I mean, I couldn't figure out why a person could be so mean when there's enough meanness already. One time a girl was being mean to me, so I caught a bull snake and caught it in my backpack, stuck it in her locker, and it jumped out at her and scared her, and she left me alone. They thought I wasn't a person to mess with.
Over here, I don't know if you've ever seen that, Richard, but over there is a double wall.
Yeah, I looked in and you can't see.
So you've got,
you can't see out.
Yeah, you've got another wall there and just a dead airspace and no way to get into it.
Did you ever wonder if your dad had gone around the bend a little bit?
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, sure. Now up there, I don't know if you knew this, Richard, but that's actually supposed to be a likeness of thunder. That's a statue of rolling thunder holding a bolt of lightning. And he said that he did that to protect the place. But what's interesting is some of the local people here in Emily actually thought that he was mad at Emily because it's facing towards Emily, and that he was throwing lightning at the people in Emily.
Well, my dad loved family, but I don't think he was a real social person. And when he passed away, we weren't here. We had actually been taken away because we were supposed to be in school, and the state found out that we were here, and I think that was what, if we were still here, I believe he'd probably still be here.
Well, the self-inflicted gunshot wound is it's almost considered a natural cause out here. I mean, several people that I've known ended that way, and usually toward the end of their life. because there's no diversions at night, and this was in January. And you're out here in the desert where you confront reality on a raw basis. You don't amuse yourself with television. So sometimes at night someone starts thinking a little too much about the human condition, and it becomes overwhelming.
He just couldn't handle the fact that we weren't here.
This remains as a monument to one man's determination to make a mark in the world and leave a monument to the Great Spirit and other things. It's completely fanciful, designed without any thought of its structural viability. No zoning ordinances were observed, no building permits were taken out. And I can't imagine anything like this happening again.
The thing about my dad, he was kind of an interesting, he had a very deep spiritual side to him, and a real good side, and then he had a very dark side, and he had both sides of him. But he told me a story about how he felt like that when the time of end was near, that the Great Spirit could swoop down here like a big eagle and grab a hold of the top of that archway and just carry the whole place off to safety. So that sounds pretty fantastic, but that's what he said.
We're a species that grew up in a temperate savanna with a kind of a broken woodland around us. We can scale ourselves to the trees. The limbs of our arms and our legs relate to the limbs of the trees. So we have a way to understand how large or small we are in the landscape, how long it takes us to get from one place to another. Come out to Nevada, you come into the Great Basin, and you're out in a place where there aren't very many trees. You have an open vista, that's what you want. You want the sense of freedom, the sense of, oh my gosh, I've got my own place now. But by the same token, you're uncomfortable because you can't scale yourself to where you are and you don't really understand the land. So as a result, people driving from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, say, they pull off to the side of the road, they see the Calico Hills off to the north of the freeway, and they think, wow, a 20-minute walk. It's going to be beautiful, right? 2 hours later, they've run out of water, they're in trouble, the highway patrol has to pick them up. You know, we really have this dissonance. We expect one thing, but it's really something else in terms of distance and scale in the desert. So it's one reason why when we build cities in the desert, we put out these great grids. It's something where we can measure ourselves in the land. So if you drive around Nevada and you talk to the painters, say, who have made paintings here, often they have fence posts and telephone poles, other vertical structures in the land in their paintings. It's because they're measuring us to the land.
The day that your cell phone works on the Black Rock Playa, the Black Rock Desert, that's probably the day that there's total coverage in the lower 48, because I can't see this being a priority spot.
The Black Rock Desert is a large playa, an ancient dry lake. Playa is always found in valley floors. The playa is formed by just material being eroded off the surrounding mountains and deposited on the valley floor. And these sediments have built up over thousands of years, even a couple of million years in many places. They're flat, they appear to be lifeless, there's no vegetation that grows on them.
You know, there's no wires, there's no noise most of the time. There's no phones, there's no TV. If you want to get away from all the noise that gunks up your head, if you want to get away from that, you get away from all of it. And that includes, you know, the conveniences of cell phones and television and radio communication. You can pick up some radio out here, yeah. But for the most part, you're in a real quiet zone out here.
When you think about the words community and commune, community means, of course, in our sense, living together with a bunch of other people, forming some kind of social contract so that you can get along and survive wherever you are. When you commune, what do? You're talking with, you're in dialogue with. So the sense of community in terms of living in the desert is very much a self-contained city, you know, that thrives off the local water source and all that. And Reno's a perfectly good example with Truckee River flowing through. It's a logical place for there to be a bunch of people living. But if you want to commune, which is implicitly a more solitary idea, right? Then you have to go away from all of the convenient things. You're going to go away from the convenient source of water and shelter because that's where everyone else is going to be. You're going to go out to some place that's harsh enough, other people won't be there. It's going to be tough enough, you're not going to have a town unless there's a mine or something. But you really try to get away from all of these notions about having a social contract when you're trying to come up, if you will, with a contract between yourself and the land. That's the kind of thing that attracts desert eccentrics.
I think it takes a real commitment to be a desert eccentric who can leave his or her mark. People who fancy themselves as desert eccentrics but give up easily, you know, you got to stand the test of time to become a desert eccentric with a capital D and a capital E. And most people find out they're just not up for that particular test.
I once wrote a book called The Void, the Grid, and the Sign about the Great Basin. The void, of course, simply being the big empty, the grid being the way we build cities, the way we map them out. It's the kind of the mapping imperative, the cartographic imperative to measure ourselves in the land. But then what's this business about the sign? Doobie Road, great example of someone who, a desert eccentric, someone who goes out and has made the terrain around Gerlach his home. The territory has been created out of the terrain, and what's left to do is now take it up to another level. So, okay, I've got my living situation settled out here. I can actually kind of support myself. Now I want to do something symbolic. I want to mark my place in a way that communicates to other people, and in a way communicates directly with the universe what I think. What do I believe about where I am? What do I believe about this place that I've created out of space? And what the heck does that have to do with the rest of the world? So here you have these, you know, this language spread out for miles along this little vernacular road. On either side you've got these piles of stones and they're scratched out with messages, or they have messages scratched on them. And that's really a way of kind of finalizing, if you will, the transformation of space into place. You take whatever is around you and you begin to transform it into something that we call art.
All throughout the desert, you find people who look at the place as a canvas of sorts. And I think old Doobie saw that, you know, he just saw a little strip there, a little road that he could commandeer and have it be his folk art, you know, his avenue of expression that really became kind of a, you know, just another swinging little eccentric spot in the desert. And the desert really seems to encourage that, and it seems to be enriched by it too. I think it is. I think it's one of those enriching little things about the Great Basin Desert.
The other thing about the desert is that it exposes time. Deserts change both very slowly and very quickly. I mean, deserts, arid places are actually shaped more by rain, by pluvial action than anything else, right? So you can see the land change very, very slowly around you, and you can also see it change very quickly around you. And that notion of time, that exposure of that difference between fast and slow time, makes the people who live out here acutely conscious of how the universe functions in a way that we forget in cities where everything is modulated to work at a certain pace. Fast or slow, it's modulated to work at a pace that is pretty given. And that's the way commerce functions and politics and everything else. Everything, the flow is controlled. Out here, the flow is not controlled. That gets expressed in the language, in the sculptures, in all of these other things. There's a sense of either timelessness or vulnerability to change. So you see Doobie Lane, you go out here and you read about eternity, basically, scratched on the rocks, right? And that sense of time has been put there, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what he was saying. He was saying this is a place where you can sense eternity because you can see time here.